Alright, so welcome back. So in this wonderful and exciting tutorial, I'll be trying to see how to deploy our Django app that we built to Kubernetes, right? So we already saw how to build the application, how to build a Docker image, and then how to push the image to Docker Hub. Now, how do we deploy the application using Kubernetes, right? Okay, so let's see how it works. So initially we saw how to create a dashboard from Microk8s, and then we remember that we're using this IP address. First of all, to be able to do that, we need a way of getting our document, our app and everything, right, together the files straight away without any issue. So all that we are doing now, we are doing inside Microk8 and then inside a VM, right? And then whatever we are doing, we are now interacting within the VM. So if I come back here, you can see that I have my VM here. Right, so this is the VM that we are already inside, and then this is the old one that is running together with the port. So in case I want to, if I come back here and I check it out, right, so this is a VM, there's nothing there, my documents are not there, my Docker file is not there, nothing is there, right? So the simplest way is that we can create a connection between our local system via kubectl and then interact with the VM that has the Microk8s cluster and everything, right? So that we can run everything we are doing locally on our system via kubectl without having to enter into my VM and enter all the commands, right? So instead of coming back here and doing Microk8s, this is the VM, then kubectl, then I have to do my get ports -a or get ports, because that is a port that is running. I don't want to be doing it within the VM. I want to do it on my local system. So how do I do that? So the first thing is that I'll just have to come back here and then let's get the IP of this. So IP A, and this is the IP of the host, not of the host but of the VM, right? So this is the IP, and that IP is very important, so that's what to be using, right? Okay, so I'll copy this one and I'll come back here, and then I remember that's the same IP we are using for our dashboard, right? So that's expired, we will work on it later. I'll come back here and I'll just do this option, so Microk8, then I'll just specify that I want to get the configuration for my connection, right? So to be able to get a configuration, that configuration is what we'll be using to help us connect, right? So Microk8 kubectl, then config. If I go with config view, we have this API version, the cluster together with this IP. So now we will have to change this IP to the IP of the VM, right? Not the local host, to be able to communicate from our local system to my VM, right? To be able to manage my Kubernetes cluster. So let's copy this file. If I go with view, these are omitted, but if I go with just raw, I'll get all the certificates there, right? So I'll copy this entire stuff here. So everything here, we will copy them. So I'll copy everything together with the certificate information all the way up to here, right? So let's copy this. I'll come back to my local system. I'm going to create a file called my cube config .yaml. Then I'll open this one here, right? So let's open this, which is here. Inside here, I'll just paste all the command that I have, the code here, right? So I'll paste it here. So the reason is filling that I did not copy it well, so it's supposed to be here. Funny. Yeah, so I'm just pasting that command, this command, notice yeah, the one from the raw, into my location here, right? Perfect. And you need to change this IP to use the IP of your VM. So I'll go back again, IP A, and then I'll pick the IP of the VM, which is this one from here, copy this one, and then I'll paste that one here. I'll replace with the 027, right, because this is no more the local host, this is the IP host, right? So what I'm doing is that now I'll connect through this configuration file, and this will talk with my VM, right? So let's save it. That's the most important thing. And how do I talk with it? So instead of running this here, to get it, now I can just do it on my local system with kubectl. I have already installed kubectl. Then I'll just go with my get pods, right? Then I will specify my KubeConfig. Then I'll specify this YAML file. And now you see that we have the same thing. So I don't need to enter into my VM and then be entering all of this command. This is very useful. You can also put this entire stuff inside an env, right? Env, I hope you know what env is. As in, you can do set, then you can just give it a particular name, just kubectl, KubeConfig. I can spell config. Then you specify the path to make it easy for you, right? It is one of the ways you can simplify your work by using I'm trying to find a simple way by using this approach, right? So that you don't need to be typing it over again, so you can easily talk with your IP or talk from your local system to, this is going to be this. Let's do it this way. pwd. Yep, so we need to get, so it's going to be set KubeConfig. Then I'll pass in this one to the file, which is my KubeConfig.yaml, right? And now once I've set it, I can just simply do kubectl get pods. So still now, okay, it couldn't find it because of the naming of it, so I have to specify that I make sure that the name is right. So kubectl abstract, sometimes it fails, but yeah, that is one of the ways. So users, I think sometimes it fails because of I can even simply do this. Because I'm in the right place, I can do this. And now I can just do this, and it's working, right? Because I'm in the current location. So this, so that I don't need to be typing this all the time, I can just do this. But once I close this, I will have to do this one again, right? Okay, so that is how to run it. Now let's see how to create our deployment. So it's going to be kube. So kubectl, right? We can just go with my get pods -a or -o wide to get all the information from it. So let's close from my VM. So now I'm no more in my VM, right? So the VM is still running. You can see that it's still running behind the scene, but I can communicate with it, right? Perfect, on my system. Let's do the deployment. So to do the deployment, the first thing we need is that we already have our Docker image already built, which is my podman images. If I come back here, you can see that we have the image that we built some time ago. It's here, and then we need to create a deployment from it, right? So we need to create a deployment is simply a pod, right? Whatever pods you have with the container inside, and as well as a replica set. So I'll just go back again and do something like this. So podman, no, not podman, but kubectl. Then I can simply create my deployment, right? So there are two ways of creating a deployment. You can use the imperative approach or the declarative approach. So declarative means you are using the YAML file, then imperative means you are not using the YAML file, right? So in case I want to do that, I can simply do something like this. So create deployment. This is the imperative approach. Then I'll specify that, okay, I want to call it called backend API. Then I will specify the image I want to use. So the image I'm using is this particular image from the one we pushed there. Remember, we push the image here, right? So we can just specify, okay, I want to use this particular image, right? And then I think the tag was 0.0.1. Then I can specify the port or the number of replicates, which is very important because this is a deployment. Let's say 1, and I can specify the port. So the port is going to be port 8000, and then I can do a simple dry run, right? So dry run to run it without creating it. So what does this one mean? It simply is something similar to this, right? So we already had our container with all the information that we have, which is the image, and then we are listening on this port, expose 8000, so that's the port you're having here, right? Perfect. So now if I go back here and I run it, so tell me, okay, there's nothing like port, it's supposed to be port 1, and now it gave us the dry run, right? We did not, it worked, so deployment has been created. But in case I want to see the output of it, I'll just go with output, then YAML, right? Then I can now specify the output here. Now, so this is a simple way to generate your deployment. So I want to create a deployment. I'm giving it a name called backend API, and this is the image I want to pull from, the one I built for my Docker file. I only want one replica, and I want to expose the port 8000. So just do a dry run. So this is one simple way of doing it, right? And now it's going to create our deployment file for us. Okay, so I can come back here, and then inside here I'll just create a directory called .k8s. So there's nothing here. Then I can now put in this command here. So I can just go with my .k8, then I'll call this deploy, right? Deployment.yaml. So you're saying, okay, requires two, yeah, the reason is I have to pipe it, so I have to pipe it here, and now it's there. So if I go back here and I open it from here, this is my project. Inside my core project, we cannot see it here, but let me open the folder outside of it so that we can see it. Select the folder. So inside my app stack, we have my K8, and you can just give it any name, but I just call it as K8, and this is the deployment, right? So this is actually the same thing we created here, right? The same thing. So this is one way of doing that. So yes, what you're saying that, okay, we want to connect with our Kubernetes, and this is the version we are using because it's an API call, and then the kind of deployment you are creating, or the kind of item we are doing, is a deployment, right? And then this is the metadata. So this you can just take it out because you don't need it. And then I'm giving this particular deployment a name. So the name is called app backend API. Can call it as a deployment, so that you separate that. Okay, this is a deployment, and this is the name it's going to be using when it's creating a pod. And then I will come back here and specify the specs. So I only want one replica, so if always keep one alive, right? Because it's just an API. In case you want more, you just add more. Then you specify that, okay, what does the selector mean? The selector means that, okay, how do I talk to my pod? Which pod should I pick, right? Which pod should I select, right? So say, okay, select a pod with the name backend API, right? And within that backend API, how do I want to generate it? So this is the template. So the template is like the blueprint I want to use to generate that particular pod, right? So I want to have a pod that has a container with the name backend API, and this is the specs for that particular pod. It's supposed to be built from a container, pull this container from the Docker registry or Choir registry, based on whatever registry you have. And then this is the name of that particular image. And I want to open this particular port. So this port is the port we are listening on, which is exactly the same port that we are listening on within our project here. If I go back to my Docker file, it was 8000. So I'm also exposing that particular port. And then you can also define your resources, right? So the resources is like the limits you want to give to your application, right? So the memory limit, and it's very important because the idea behind containers is to able to share resource and manage resources. So how will you specify that? So I'll come back here and I'll take off this and I'll specify that, okay, for the request. So let's go back here. I think it's for the request. I want to specify my CPU that I want to use. So the CPU I want to use, I just want to use 20 megabytes. And then for the memory, I want it to be just use 300 memory units, right? And I can also specify the limits for my resources. The limit is, I just only care about the memory for now. I'll just go, let's say 400 MI, right? So that is it. So this is how to create a simple deployment. We have seen how to create a deployment from the imperative way. From, did I say imperative? Yeah. From the declarative way. This is from the imperative way. And then we can also get the imperative one here, right? Perfect. Now let's run it and see if it's working. If I come back here, I'll just go back to run it. If I, okay, it's there, right? To run it, I'll just go with, if I do ls/lh, so I just inside my K8, I can run it with this option here, to kubectl -apply-f, then I can specify what to run. So .k8, right? And I just go with my deployment file. Now that I have created my deployment file, my deployment, I can check it out. So kubectl to get deployment, right? Now there's only one deployment that's running. I can specify with the override to see the IP that's running, right? So this is just one, not the IP, but it's running on this particular one. But how do I access it, right? I don't know. How do I access it? How do I get information about this? So I will have to create a service for this to be able to talk with my system, right? So this is my pod with the deployment, but I need a way to be able to talk with the outside world. That's where we need a service. So we're using a simple service. So to create a service, I can do my kubectl, right? And I can go with create service. You can also do expose service. Any of them is going to be okay to be able to create one, right? You can also do the same thing, or you can just simply go with this option here. Inside my declarative approach way, I want to show you here. Inside here, right, I can create another file and I'll call it as service, right? .yaml. And then I can just copy one I have and then I'll use it, right? So I already have one here. You can also use the declarative approach, as I said, or the imperative approach, as I said, to be able to create a service. And it's still going to work, right? So either use any of them, it will still work. So let me copy it from here. Yeah, right. So what I'm doing is that I'm creating a service version v1, and the kind is called a service, and I'm giving it a name. So backend API, you can call that backend API service, and then the selector is the same name I'm giving, and then I'm listening on port 8000, which is actually the same port here, and it's actually the same port within my container port. And then this can be a load balancer, it can be a node port, it can be any other port, right? So let's save it, and then let's run. If I go back here and I run it, everything works. So now the service has been created, and now I can just go back again, and then I can just do my service svc. So now we have my backend, the API load balancer, listen on this particular port, and it's pending. And then we have the other ones there. So I can just go back again, and then in case I want to get all the ports that are running now, so port. Oh, right. So now we see I have my backend API deployment port, which is running on this particular option here. So how do I access it? So to access it, if I come back here, so this is the IP, right? And this is on port 8000. So if I copy this and then I paste it here inside my browser, nothing, you cannot see it, right? So you need to do port forwarding to allow you to be able to see that. And then simply Kubernetes makes it easy for us to do that. And then that is simply like this. Even if I put my 8000 here, I still cannot reach it. So we need to port forward it, right? So I'll come back here, and then to do port forward, I just go with my kubectl. I just go with my expose or port forward. Then I'll specify the deployment. So backend, I'll copy this one here. That's the port I want to port forward. Then I'll specify what I want to listen on. So 8000 from the container, and outside 8000. Then that's it, right? So if I go with this now, so I just port forwarding to this route. And now if I come back and I copy this here, it's my localhost, or I can just use localhost here instead of this now. So now we have our application working, right? So this is coming from Kubernetes. It's not coming from any of the system. It's coming from my ports, right? I can switch to my API docs. It says it's working as expected. I can try it out, execute, and then everything is working. So what we did is that we created a deployment file, right, which has this particular metadata. It has just one replica, and then it has the following template, right, with the specs. In case you want to use your local system not to pull from an image, you have to add this command here. I think it is called ImagePull. You just have to add ImagePullPolicy. So in case you are doing this locally, right, and you don't want to pull it from somewhere, just go with policy never, or you can just go if not present, right? So you can just go with never to never pull it from Docker Hub or any registry system, right? It's going to pull it from your local system, but I prefer sometimes to push it here, right? Perfect. So that is how to deploy it. Then we have my service, and this is going to help me forward my my port so that I'll be able to access it. And then I did port forwarding to get it. Now let's go back again to the multipass, and I want to see if my port is running. To monitor it, so I just click back here. So it's running again. I will copy this one from here, right? And then notice that the IP is not this 127, the IP is the IP of the VM. So I'll go back again to my location here. So that is the IP of the VM. And now I can, let's refresh. I can now paste in the token, sign in. You can see that we have my deployment there, right? So the deployment that we have, which is running here, this deployment together with the Nginx pod, you can see that we have it here. So there is one deployment the backend deployment that we specified together with the pod. So we have one deployment, two pods are running, and then the replica is just one, and you can get information about it, right? About the CPU usage. So if I go back and then let's put one here and then put one side by side. Right. So if I keep on adding something, you'll be able to see some changes in the CPU. I wanted to show you, but it seems, yeah. See, right? It's a CPU usage for them. So there's a deployment. So if I run, yeah, I don't know why it's not showing. Yeah, so this is useful to monitor. So in case you want to monitor all of these things, it's very useful to monitor your deployment. Right, the CPU cost use over the time. So it's not using much because it's not intensive application. So this will be Accra. If I go back and I refresh, right, so something like this. So this is very useful and can be useful in case you want to have a simple UI to monitor what is happening, right? Now that is something that I want to show you too. I hope you have learned something in this tutorial. In case you also want to deploy delete these deployment, you can simply do this option here. So we just use this to create the deployment. In case I want to delete it, I can just go with kubectl, then delete deployment, and then you can specify the name of the deployment you want to delete. So in case I want to delete this particular deployment, and just copy it like this, and now it's gone. Even if I go back here and then I refresh this, go back to the deployment, so there's no deployment, right? Very nice. And then you can quickly create deployment in case you want. And then when I've been created, if I go back here, refresh, we have one there, and the application is also working, right? So thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you have learned something. See you in the next session. We have seen how to build a Python application in Django. We've seen how to push it, build an image from it and push it to Docker Hub. And then we have seen how to set up our own Kubernetes cluster using Microk8s here. And we have understood the cluster and the worker node. And then you have seen how to spin up our pods, right? You can also move into this particular container, right, or to this particular pod by just going to my kubectl. Then if I go with my get pods, so this is the only pod running. So in case I want to get into this pod, I can, to move into this container, right, I can also do something like this. So kubectl exec, just like in Docker or Podman, paste it here, and I'll specify I want to get it as bash if there is bash, but there is no bash, right? And there is no entry point. Okay, it's funny. So backend deployment bash, yeah. So that is how to make it. It's saying that okay, I think maybe I see why it's failed. I did not paste it all. So it's supposed to be J at the end. Now, so I'm already inside that particular container, right? And then you can see what is there. So these are exactly the same content that we had here. All the same content is what we are having here, right? Very cool. And I can check the IP of this. PADR. I don't have, it's funny, I have to install it. Okay, that is something that I want to share with you. I hope you have learned something. See you in the next session. Stay blessed.